Hey there, this is Dan McLaughlin, and I'm going to read to you some stories from Honolulu Magazine's article, Minahune, Hauntings and Choking Ghosts, 6 Beloved Ghost Stories from Hawaii's Spooky Past this is my part 2, and these are the other 5 stories. First one's called Maluganan by D. Kusumoto. I'll never forget it, D. Kusumoto was a 4th grader at Ka'iwai Elementary School when she was introduced to the Filipino phenomenon known as Maluganan. I saw it with my own eyes, says D. I watched as a woman was possessed by a ghost. It happened in 1973, days before a man had been shot on a Kalihi street. He died. At the time of the fatal shooting, the man's wife was in the Philippines. As soon as she received the horrible news, she flew to Hawaii. Now I'm going to pause here. I'm going to let you read the questions. You might have different questions than the one that are listed here. You can pause this and go back and answer your questions. Okay, we're still on the story. Immediately, friends and family members of the dead man, including D, gathered in an old Kalihi home near Dole Middle School. Together, they held a prayer session. The prayers were supposed to help the dead man's soul find its way to heaven. The prayer sessions are held for 9 straight days, though they were held at night since people had to work, says D. Older generations conducted the praying. I was just a kid. It was fascinating to watch. D says the widow of the dead man had been praying when the unexplained occurred. The Ilocano term for what I saw is maluganan, she said, or being ridden by a ghost. The mother of the dead man placed a black cloth on the widow's face to help her son's spirit to speak. They lay her down on her back, says D. Then the parents of the dead man asked the woman a bunch of questions. And then, through the woman, the dead man began to speak. She got real stiff and her body got straight as a rod, said D. Then she started talking in a very weird voice that was low and hoarse. It was very similar to the ghost movies we've all seen. My oldest sister said that when the widow talked, the voice was that of the husband. It definitely did not sound like her voice, that's for sure. According to Ilocano tradition, the spirit has to be very strong or not yet ready to leave the world in order for the maluganan to occur. D now teaches social studies to 11th and 12th grade students at Kapolei High School. She is also the mother of 2 children. It was definitely strange, says D, shaking her head. To this day, I've never seen anything like that ever again. Haunted by Ruben Macinas. At first glance, Ruben Macinas may seem like a typical guy. A man with an easy smile. Ruben enjoys fishing, working out, and playing an occasional round of golf with his buddies. But ever since he can remember, Ruben has always stumbled upon another way to pass the time. I don't know why, he says. I've always seen ghosts. I guess ghosts, they like me. Ruben says it began in the 4th grade when his class at Honolulu Elementary School went on a weekend camping trip to Camp Erdman in Mokuleia. At night, we were supposed to be asleep in the cabin, says Ruben, but me and my friends, we snuck out and headed for the beach. On the beach, Ruben and his friends tossed rocks into the surf and talked story. One guy even brought a fishing pole. It was pretty cool, says Ruben, until we saw him. Him, according to Ruben, was a man walking on the beach carrying an old lantern. He looked like a local guy, says Ruben. He wasn't wearing a shirt. It looked like he was wearing shorts or a malo or a lava. Ruben and his buddies thought they'd spotted a fisherman We thought maybe he was torching or something, says Reuben. The boys decided to follow the man who walked along the water's edge. All of a sudden he stopped and walked toward the ocean, says Reuben. The man disappeared into the darkness. Reuben and his buddies thought maybe he was heading into the water to look for fish. We couldn't see Jack, says Reuben, but all of a sudden we seen this light rise into the night sky. 30, 40 feet, damn, we was scared. You should have seen how fast all of us ran back to our cabins. Reuben recalls another brush with the unexplainable. Once again, he was in grade school. His friend's grandmother had died. Reuben went to visit his friend in Haleiwa to offer his condolences. I met him at his late grandmother's house, says Reuben. Reuben remembers the afternoon clearly. It began fairly typically. The boys ate chili dogs for lunch. Then they watched checkers and pogo on TV. But things changed quickly. Reuben had walked into the kitchen to get some Kool-Aid when something made him look out the window. I seen this old lady in the garden, says Reuben. She had white hair. She wore a red muumuu with white and yellow flowers. She wore this straw hat. You know, the kind of straw hat a lot of tutus wear? But I couldn't see the lady's face. She was tending her plants. Reuben rushed back into the living room and told his friend that someone was in the yard. No act, said his friend. I ain't acting, said Reuben. Reuben, his friend, looked out the window. The woman was still there. I told you, said Reuben. Who was that? That looks like my grandma, said Reuben's friend, his face pale. She always loved taking care of those flowers. Coming up, Living with a Ghost by Sarah Iverson. Sarah Iverson had traveled a long way to live with a ghost. Originally from Minnesota, Sarah had moved into a 3-bedroom, 3-bath Eva Beach home with 3 roommates last June. Several weeks later, she began seeing a mysterious shadow repeatedly walking from her downstairs bedroom to the bathroom. I didn't believe it was really there. I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy, says Sarah, who teaches science to 8th graders at Kapolei Middle School. She didn't say a word until her roommates also began seeing the shadow. I kept seeing this dark shadow in the hallway, says Kelly Tarner, one of Sarah's roommates. It looked like the figure of a man. Like Sarah, Kelly had moved to Hawaii from the mainland to teach in Oahu's public schools. I'd heard tons of ghost stories at home in Pennsylvania, says Kelly, but there is a completely different feel here in Hawaii. It's more spiritual here. After 2 of my roommates said something, I knew it would be okay to talk about it, says Sarah. At first, the ghost never really scared me. I would notice it almost daily, although I felt strange about it. I was never scared. Sarah says that for some reason, the more she talked about the ghost with her roommates, the more prominent it seemed to get. Eventually, it showed up in her bedroom. I would be sleeping at night, says Sarah. Something would wake me up. I'd see this figure. Often, I'd knock it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. I knew there was something in the house, but I didn't want to believe that it was in my room. Sarah says the ghost is of a man about 6 feet tall. He wears a black hat, vest, and a long-sleeved purple shirt. Sarah says she has never been able to see the ghost's face clearly. Throughout the weeks, the ghost would get closer and closer to me, says Sarah, but it never touched me. One night, I woke up with it standing over me, and it gave me chills. Sarah and her roommates decided to have the house blessed by a Christian minister. That helped. The ghost disappeared, but several weeks later, it returned. He never came inside, said Sarah. But at night, when I sat in the living room, I could see him walk past the screen door and occasionally walk past our floor-to-ceiling windows. This freaked me and my roommates out. We ignored it for a couple of weeks, hoping it would go away, but it never did. Instead, it came back in the house. Sarah says the ghost has been spotted in the laundry room and may have been photographed. Without telling me, my roommates went into my bedroom and took pictures in the dark with a digital camera, says Sarah. When the pictures came out, they appeared normal on the surface. After zooming in, though, there was this reddish light that appeared in the mirror. And when you zoomed in on that, it looked like the outline of a man holding a baby. In another part of the mirror was the image of an older man. These images startled me, but this wasn't the figure I was seeing at night. Could this mean there was more than one ghost? Why didn't Sarah and her roommates just move? I didn't want to believe that a ghost could really haunt the house, said Sarah. I did get some scares and some eerie feelings, but I never thought my life was being threatened. Instead, Sarah's Bible study group met at her home and prayed for the spirit to leave the house. I think it took a couple of weeks before I realized that, yes, the spirit was really gone, says Sarah. End of story? Not quite. New roommates in the house have had ghostly sightings. I don't know if I'm psyching myself out, but I'm pretty sure we will have the house blessed again, said Sarah. I never believed in ghosts or spirits, but I had heard many people talk about them. Moving to Hawaii has given me the experience of both seeing and feeling spirits. I have become a believer now that I have lived here. Next one, Menehune by Leilani Whitford. Leilani Whitford is cutting potatoes, making a salad for luau. Recently retired from the Department of Education, Leilani taught hundreds of students at Nanakuli High, an intermediate school, for 31 years. She will never forget one girl she met in the mid-'80s. She was 13 or 14 years old, says Leilani, pausing over her cutting board. I think she was in the 8th grade or so. The girls spent a lot of time on Hawaiian homestead land near Lower Tantalus. She enjoyed the lush area and often wandered along the nearby mountain trails. Leilani said the girl was an excellent student. She also had the ability to see menehune. During the day, she watched them at play in a Tantalus bamboo grove. At night, she saw them gather by a nearby stream. One morning at school, the girl told Leilani she was tired and asked if it was okay to stay in her classroom and rest during recess. Leilani said that was fine and left the room. When she returned to the classroom, she found her students shaking. Then she ran out of the door, says Leilani. Leilani caught up with the girl and asked her what was wrong. The student said that she had looked out of the classroom window toward the mountains and had seen two menehune playing the ancient game of ulumaika. The girl said the menehune were rolling a lava rock between two wooden stakes, says Leilani. All of a sudden, one of the menehune looked up from the game and spotted my student. Then their eyes met. It was the way the menehune looked at my student that terrified her. The girl described the menehune as a dark, ancient-looking men wearing malo tied with ropes. One evening, Leilani went to a party on Ahuimanu Road in Kaneohe with some of her old classmates from the Kamehameha schools. I was sitting in the living room looking out the window, says Leilani. It was completely black outside. There was no moonlight, no nothing. All of a sudden, says Leilani, she saw mysterious balls of light floating outside of a window. They moved from left to right, says Leilani. Sometimes they formed columns and soared into the sky. Then they disappeared. Leilani decided it was time to get some answers. She paid a visit to a famous kahuna Lapa'au, Sam Lono, in his Haiku Valley home. The medicinal kahuna told Leilani she had seen the sacred lights. He told me I'm a marked person, says Leilani, because the lights came to me. Only special people can see those lights. He told me when I saw the lights, I was supposed to ask for something, but only something good. If you ask for something bad will happen to you. Then Leilani asked the kahuna Lapa'au about her student, the girl who kept on seeing the menehune. Uncle Sam said a lot of kids who live near mountains see menehune, says Leilani. He said a lot of shaken parents bring these children to him. He gives them a Hawaiian blessing. It's funny, the children can see the menehune, but for some reason, the adults can't. Leilani smiles and returns to the potato salad she had been preparing. She says every now and then she'll run into the student who had seen the menehune. She turned out to be a good person, says Leilani, and a good mother. The Lady in Waiting. During the 17 years he wore the badge of the Honolulu Police Department, Ray Durapan had seen and heard many things, but for him it was his 2-year stint at the Honolulu airport in the early 1990s that raised some of the most intriguing questions. There's a lot of unexplainable stuff going on at the airport, says Ray. Perhaps none is more unexplainable than the Lady in Waiting. When I was at the airport, part of my duties was to respond to calls, says Ray. A call he'd get over and over again was about a lady standing at a gate, looking out a window at the runway. Callers said the woman looked like someone waiting for the arrival of a passenger, but all the passengers were long gone. Many times, the planes were long gone. The woman was sometimes seen in secured areas where no one without proper authorization could go. She was blonde, says Ray, and wearing a long white dress. People never saw her face, just the back of her. One caller said she was transparent. Ray says airport employees would call to her, ask her if she needed assistance, but receive no response. That's when they'd call the police. When Ray or one of his fellow officers checked out the scene, they always found nothing. We get calls from all kinds of airport employees, says Ray, from custodial staff to airline personnel. They all saw her. The calls almost always came at night or just before sunset. The folks at the airport call her the Lady in Waiting. Ray says many airport employees told the sad story of the Lady in Waiting. The woman had fallen in love with a man who had promised to marry her. Instead, the man took off on an international flight and never returned. The heartbroken woman eventually committed suicide, but she came back from the grave and now waits at the airport for the man of her dreams to return to her. Every time I get that call, I get the heebie-jeebies, says Ray, shaking his head. You have this eerie feeling. Every time we checked it out, we never saw her. But still, I respect stories like that one. You have to. You just respect them. Ray says he's heard a number of stories about the unexplained events at the airport. Custodians talk about cleaning empty restrooms in the middle of the night and watching in shock as rolls of toilet paper mysteriously unravel, toilets flush, or toilet seats slam. Drivers of the Wiki shuttle talk about the solitary passenger who sits in the back of the bus in the middle of the night, then disappears with no warning. Fellow police officers wonder about the banging sounds they hear in their locker room when no one else is around. They wonder why the shower mysteriously turns on when they are in the locker room alone. Ray has been puzzled by the appearance of wet footprints on the floor of the locker room when he swears no one has used the showers. Folks say the locker room the police used was once a morgue, says Ray. That might have something to do with all the weird stuff going on in there. Still, Ray says the ghosts at the airport mean no harm. The ghosts are usually described as playful ghosts, says Ray. They don't hurt nobody, except the choking ghosts. Ray says he knows several fellow HPD officers who swear they have been attacked by choking ghosts while working the airport beat. They won't tell you, but I will, says Ray. They were in their cars late at night when all of a sudden they felt something sitting on their chests. They couldn't breathe. We're police officers. We're not supposed to be scared of anything, but let me tell you something. A choking ghost will get your attention. Ray says there's even more. There is stuff going on at the airport that nobody can explain, says Ray, who is now retired from the force. Ask anybody who's worked there for a long time. Ask the old timers. They'll tell you. All right, so I have read this whole bunch of articles here, so you can always play along as you read and stop and answer questions. It's here for you to use as a resource, right? Hope you enjoyed some of these stories. Think about some stories that you've heard, because I want to hear them. All right, talk to you later.